Hey everybody, and welcome to the one before last content-based lecture of the semester. I think that sounds nice, right? So today's session is to go deeper into the process of decision making. It's the second session of 3 on it. And today we're going to focus on need recognition and search. So not on the process as such as we did last time, but rather on the first steps of the process. So bear with me and let's go through this. When we start, last time we looked at different approaches towards decision making, right? We looked at habitual versus extended decision making, and we looked at what influences and how these decisions might differ from each other. I related them to be system 1 and system 2 decisions and gave some examples how we are responsive to different types of stimuli in different parts of the process, and also with how much depth we go through the process in this sense. Basically, remember the 2 major determinants were involvement and risk, right? And these were basically determining whether we are going through an extensive or a very short decision-making cycle. The decision-making process, on the other hand, was highlighted here on the left. In this case, we're looking at the need, on the right. The decision-making process starts with need recognition, and then with information search, and then the evaluation of alternatives, choice, and the post-choice evaluation. So today we're going to focus on the need recognition and the search of information. And then on the next session, we're going to close it up by looking at the alternatives, choice, and some post-choice evaluation. And that's it, basically. Good. So when we go through the needs, we have already talked about the needs in the session on motivations, and also in other classes, we have seen these the 5 different types of needs that people have. In this case, the Maslow pyramid for the hierarchy of needs, starting with physiological or survival needs, then moving on to safety, then social needs, self-esteem needs, and self-fulfillment needs, right? If you want to remember it in an S-shaped version, in this case, feel free to. What is nice to remember at some point in time, needs become more individual the higher we move up the pyramid, right? Needs become more hedonic the more we move up the pyramid. And also typically once we have fulfilled one set of needs to a sufficient level, we move up. So typically once we have fulfilled the needs sufficiently, it might be that we are not that attentive to that particular part anymore. So this is also important, that we won't derive satisfaction from more safety if we feel safe. And in the same way, if we feel sufficiently social, more social interactions might not give us value. And this is important to keep in mind when we look at needs, to give it some twist towards the other presentations that we have seen this semester. So overall, these are the needs. The need recognition basically is, when we take the consumption process, is the in-between state of a need and a want. Because the need recognition basically postulates that we do recognize actively that we need something. And this is typically, in an abstract way, looking at it as follows. Typically, we have an actual state and a desired state, in the sense that we might not feel as we would like to feel. And with this gap, we sort of have a realized need if we feel this gap between our actual state and our desired state. Very straightforward and easy example. If I do not feel well fed, I am hungry, and my desired state is not being hungry anymore, so I eat something. And in the same way, if you enroll to university, you might feel not smart enough, and therefore you are registering in university to reach the goal of feeling smart enough. Or you might also lack the self-esteem of lacking a title, and the desired state is holding a title, taking it from that perspective, not from a self-actualization, but from a self-esteem basis, or maybe both. And that's why, right? So basically, this is the idea, and it can apply to pretty much every decision. When we recognize a need, normally has to do with a difference in the actual and the desired state. And now this is typically where this is the opportunity for any marketer to work with this gap between the actual and the desired state, because bringing you from the actual to the desired state is the entire idea of satisfying customer needs in this sense, because this is how we empower and allow people to move from their actual to their desired state. The nice thing is, once they have reached the desired state in one part, they might realize that they do not have the desired state in another part. So this is an endless thing. Humanity is never completely satisfied and never completely happy. So this is the interesting thing about this. This is not an ultimate state that can be achieved, but there will be always something that withholds us from the actual and the desired state. I think here the analogy of the grass being greener on the other side comes in a lot. There's always something we would like to have. There's always something else we were interested in, and so on and so forth. So there is always a desired state for almost to everybody. And from a survival perspective, I think that makes sense, because if you stop desiring things, you're sacrificing your will to move forward, and probably you would give up on your survival instincts in that. So it's probably inherent to humanity for good reasons that we always desire something else. However, of course, in a global economic consideration, this is also pretty bad for Earth in that sense. If everybody wants all the time to travel more, to want to have more clothing, to consume more, to own more, we are screwing the planet's resources, and we're doing that since basically 150 years, something like that. So it has horrible consequences on a large scale, but it might be a crucial driver of human survival in the first place. So it's an interesting thing to look at it like that. And the main thing is, of course, that whenever we have an identified gap between an actual and desired state, if I figure out how to close that, I can sell you something at the end of the day. And that's my opportunity as a company or as a marketer as such. So this is important to keep in mind. This is theoretical how need recognition works. And only if we realize that explicitly or implicitly, system one or system two, we can go on and consume something, basically. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it, right? We would not go on and take action if it weren't for the gap of the actual and the desired state. Now, what do marketers do in all this? Interestingly, of course, they create products to help you reach the desired state, right? They create food products to satisfy your cravings. They build furniture to satisfy your accommodation necessities, and so on and so forth. Most products are simply put up. They make sense in order to reach a desired state. If I am not comfortable at home, I might buy a sofa, and then I'll be comfortable at home. As simple as that. And that's what the sofa is made for. If the sofa also has a very fancy Italian brand, it might also satisfy other needs. But however, most products simply are there to help you reach a desired state. That's the overall definition of any industry, and the overall definition of marketing is satisfying customer needs. However, that's not all that marketers do. Also, marketers actively work on altering the desired state to create needs that you didn't know you had. And that's something that often happens, right? In the sense that, think about how happy we were, or how happy people were 15 years ago. Did people have smartphones and a lot of digital communication 15 years ago? No. Were they still happy? Yes. Why? Nobody had realized that there was a need for a smartphone, for instance. And like that, people were happy anyway. While nowadays, nobody can imagine that anymore, and not any technological advance and any type of significant technological innovation typically alters the desired states. In that sense, you can see it that everybody nowadays considers it normal to have a TV, because having entertainment opportunities at home is considered a normal function and a normal thing to have right now, and it wasn't maybe 50, 60 years ago. So that's important to keep in mind. With innovations, we are also changing and create new needs. And one of the most popular examples in history was when Sony introduced the Walkman, basically the first portable music device which ran on cassettes. And when they introduced that in the 80s, they did market research on it, and they asked people whether they would be interested in a small device that would fit in their pocket, which would allow them to carry their music wherever they go. In the market research, it resulted that people didn't want the product for the mere fact that didn't say they weren't interested in such a product. Why? I couldn't imagine that it would be nice to listen to your own music while you're on the go. And in that sense, they didn't know they had that desired state. And over the time, when they see some people doing it, when they experience the advantages of having music around you when you are on your way going about and doing your things, for instance, on a boring train ride, it's better to listen to music than not listening to music. As simple as that. And like this, they realized that they had a desired state that they didn't know they had before. So this is something that is important to keep in mind. Marketers and companies, through innovation and new product development, altered desired states all the time. In that sense, this is something we have to keep in mind when we look at the current developments. And of course, when a desired state becomes common, in that sense, that means just because we have more things and own more things and theoretically are better off than any generation before us, does not necessarily mean we have to become happier. It's just that through information technology and all that, the desired state is also observable from many others, right? So this is something to keep in mind. And of course, marketers also sell you wants as needs, right? Marketers do that in the sense that often needs might be sold as wants, as simple as that you have a feeling that you really need a certain product and not only the underlying need to be satisfied. And then what I mentioned when we talked about the desired state, the desired state is, of course, affected by many factors, right? It's always the difference from here between there. It might be novelty is attractive to human beings. If you see something with others, this might change whether you want something or not. You might not be interested in joining social media unless all your friends are on there already, and then you see you're sort of feeling excluded if you don't belong there, and so on and so forth. And of course, the situational factors that we've seen a couple of weeks or a couple of sessions ago also make their impact on this, right? Of course, not all realized needs are addressed, right? We have all these things like that we say, okay, I don't know, I have this item in my household and it broke and I would need to buy something else to fix it, and then we never do it. We realized that need, we just didn't go on about it because we didn't anticipate sufficient value from it. You all realized that there was this need to do the homework in order to get the good grade, but yet you didn't do it because you were busy doing other things. Everybody knows these things, that even if we realize a need, we don't always go on and comply with it, right? We have the desired state of having gotten all the work done. We didn't. Damn it. So in this case, we are thinking about the desired state is not always reached. It's not always reached through consumption. And the desired perfect state is never reached as such, as I've mentioned earlier, right? So whether we go on and address our needs is typically the anticipation of value. If we think it's promising enough to get something done or to engage in something, we'll do it. If we don't, we won't. As simple as that. And if we, for instance, do not go on and address the realized needs, the decision-making process stops. And if we, for instance, immediately act after having if we engage in habitual decision-making, we might not even engage in any information search in this sense. So in this case, the decision-making process is also only a theoretical construct that in its most extensive form, all stages are followed actively, but a lot of stages along the decision-making process can also be just followed automatically, habitual by system one, and maybe not be even in our mind for any split second and cause any active system two participation. So this is basically for need recognition. Now, once we recognize the need and we want to go on and reach our desired state, we typically start searching. And there are several ways to search. Typically, the first question is always to answer, what do we search for? And that's pretty straightforward when we talk about consumption. We are looking either at alternatives, right? What are options to fulfill my need? What are prices? what are the relevant attributes to take into consideration, and how do these attributes perform on each of the alternatives that I have identified. Now, when we put these things into a formula, in the sense that we look at different alternatives, right? 3 different alternatives for breakfast cereal. We look at the prices. In this case, the price was made an attribute as such, but price is maybe important enough to stick out. And there's other attributes such as good taste, healthiness, and the filling. And then we look at how important are these attributes, right? The evaluation, and then we add our score on the belief of the performance of those attributes. And like that, if we have all these information available to us, we are able to develop an attitude towards it. So obviously, when we search information, we search for alternatives, we search for attributes, and we search for the performance of those attributes. If we do not have this information to some degree available, how can we develop an attitude if this is what attitudes are made of, at least in a very rational way? And of course, as we are free to put in any attribute that we consider relevant, and that as we determine the score, how relevant an attribute is, even sort of weird decisions can be rationally explained with this attitude model. So this is basically, when we talk about consumption, what's necessary to know when we search. On the other hand, we have 2 different major types of search. On the one hand, there's the so-called ongoing search. And this is basically a search process that, as it's labeled, it's ongoing. And it means that we're staying up to date on a topic of interest, on a product category, on a service, on whatever, on any type of topic that we are interested in, and consistently update us, right? So this might even happen automatically as a part of the daily routine. For instance, I'm into rap music. You might have realized that. So I listen to a couple of podcasts around the music and rap scene, and thereby I keep myself updated of what's happening. I browse through a certain website, sometimes for entertainment purposes and so on and so forth, but I'm relatively updated on what's happening, at least in the German rap scene. That's maybe not something to be very proud of, but it's still something that I do. So I am ongoing searching on it, and I always realize when an artist that I am interested in puts out an album, and I figure out where to listen to it, whether to buy it, and so on and so forth. I also figure out if somebody gives concerts that I'm interested in. So I don't need to look these things up specifically, but I will be informed once something happens because I'm involved in it, right? So typically, if we're involved in a topic or interested in a topic, we do exhibit some level of ongoing search behavior. Then on the other hand, the other type of search is pre-purchase search. So that is obviously then purchase specific, right? The classic thing, we are situationally involved in something, or only involved in something because the product has a high risk. We've seen that last time when we have to make a big investment. So we are likely to engage in extended decision-making, and that would maybe require a pre-purchase search if we're not highly involved in the category. If you'd ask me now, don't know, which rap record to buy or which soccer game to see, I can give you an immediate answer because I am ongoingly searching for information. While on the other hand, when we talk about buying a house, I'm not that much interested in real estate. So at the moment when I want to buy a house, I have to do a big information search because it's such a risky thing, because you can only with your resources, I can't even buy one house with my resources. So in that sense, if I want to buy one, I need to take up a loan, and that is quite a risky thing. So you only have one shot, and if you miss it, you are messing things up. So that would be definitely requiring an extensive pre-purchase search, which is then purchase specific and not because I am interested overall in real estate. So this is basically 2 different types of search behavior. It can either be ongoing or pre-purchase specific. An interesting phenomenon nowadays is search has changed a lot and search has altered a lot. We all know that search is basically has a new synonym, which is Googling or Google it. To Google something is a synonym of searching for information. So a company has made an entrance and changed our life, and online search has changed the way we search for things. We're going to see that in a little more extensive, but it's important that nowadays, rather, it's not so much the problem of do I find the information, but it's rather the problem is that there's too much information on things that it maybe even complicates our decisions and overloads us with information in order to make a decision. So we need to, it's rather today, back in the day, it was a big question of knowing where to find information. And nowadays it's more a question of knowing how to select the right sources of information to make the right decisions. That's the skill nowadays, because there's a whole lot of information out there and we can get frustrated from having so much information on things out there. That's important to keep in mind. Okay, so typically we have ongoing and pre-purchase search, and both can yield information overload nowadays. What's interesting as well, two other ways to look at search is we can look for information internal and externally, in that sense that typically when we talk about internal search, we refer to the retrieval of knowledge, right? Remember, knowledge, the main challenge to knowledge is retrieving the information. That's the main challenge when we know something, to find it back, to figure out how were these equations I was taught in high school, how were they solved, right? Figuring that out again. How was that word called in Spanish? Even though I had Spanish in high school. So retrieving knowledge is always the big problem. So we might internally, we might be thinking, I knew this one day, how was this? And what was the best thing to do? What did I always eat when I was over there? And so on and so forth. So we retrieve knowledge, and that is of course internal information search. We have a brain which is a high performance computer in our heads, so we might as well use it, right? So that's something that we do. Now, which is important, if we have a lot of previous knowledge, is something that marketers are typically very interesting, is a factor which we call the consideration set. That is typically made up out of previous knowledge, and typically is the set of alternatives that we are taking into consideration for purchase. So when we purely internally, when we don't engage in external information, the internal information gives us this consideration set. For instance, out of all brands that sell something, like of all brands of breakfast cereal, I have only a reduced awareness set, so of brands that I know that exist. And then I might have a consideration set, which are the 3 brands that were on display on the previous slides. Then I might have, so these are the brands that I'm really interested in buying. So I might engage in an evaluation, which I like best today. And then I have an inert set, which means I have inertia towards that. That might be a set of brands that I know, which I don't really like, but I don't really dislike, right? Consideration set is the set of brands that are options. Inert set are brands that I know but don't care about. And then there might be the inept set, which is a very nice name. I don't know why they put that word on it, but basically that means the set of brands that we would not buy. It's the opposite of the consideration set, is the so-called inept set, which means that I would never buy these things. So I can be positive, indifferent, or negative towards a brand, right? And then typically for marketers, being on the consideration set is a major goal for any fast-moving habitual decisions. Because if you're on the, like we've said, we don't maybe think about the breakfast cereal too much. We don't think about the toothpaste so much. So at least being in the top 3 alternatives is enough to get a purchase from a customer once in a while. Might be through a stock out of a competitor, might be variety seeking, right? Remember, people might be looking for more variety in their life, and thereby they might change their toothpaste from time to time. So being in the consideration set typically allows us to sell to a consumer. And that's why marketers want to be, especially in cheap and fast-moving purchases. It's a high advertising and high repetition of brand names gets us into the consideration set. That's why we have that so much. So that is for the consideration set, and that typically results out of an internal information search. So when we talk about just knowing about which brands do I know, where do I want to go to eat? I go to that restaurant, I always liked it. Good. And that's and the immediate choice of 2 or 3 restaurants which come to your mind are your consideration set. However, of course, we can change the consideration set with additional experiences and additional external search. However, we do not always engage in external search. So at the moment, as I said, habitual decision-making for a brand, it's extremely crucial to be on the consideration set. That's important. So That's why this is an important concept when looking at internal information search. If we engage in external information search, however, typically, as I said, the most important challenge nowadays is to figure out sources. So what do people weigh in when they choose sources? When you look at all the fake news, I think people do not look at a lot of things of their sources nowadays. People are not fact checking because that costs effort and that costs time, so they don't do it. So what do we do? A major determinant is the ease and the speed of the availability of information in order. That's where we search, where we find it most easily. As we said, the first page of Google gets all the clicks because we are even too lazy to click on page 2, right? So ease and speed is extremely important in determining that. So being on the first page and even in the top 3 results for a search query makes us part of the consumer's information search. Otherwise, we might be not. And then, of course, in a second stage, consumers also evaluate the objectivity and the trustworthiness of a source. So at least, especially the more highly we get involved into something and the more educated people are, the more they might double check things and they might rely on these things. So that's important to keep in mind. Basically, ease and the ease and the quality of the information are the 2 determining factors, because objectivity and trustworthiness. Sometimes you want trustworthy information. It doesn't even need to be objective. If you know that somebody has similar tastes, you might be even very interested in a subjective evaluation of that person who has similar tastes like you, right? So that would be important. On the other hand, if it's a pure technical thing, you might look at only objectivity. But it's basically how easy is it to get the information, and how relevant is this information to you? Those are the 2 things, right? And that also explains if it's easy and confirms your way of looking at things. This is also how fake news propels so much, because it's very easy if you're already a racist and then hear fake news about refugees being criminals, that you don't need to double check it. It was easy to find that information. It was from people that have similar mindsets like you, and that's why you propel and propagate such information as well. And so that makes sense that with this process, also the distribution of fake news and problematic information propel a lot with new communication tools. Now, where do we do this? Basically, of course, where do we engage in external search? We might either ask friends or families. That's a clear thing. And online, we are even more connected to people who think like us, that might not even be friends or family, but acquaintances that have similar mindsets. Of course, we use search engines, we use social media, we use review platforms. There are tons of these things. Interestingly, I think this information search is now taking place generally almost exclusively online, besides face-to-face conversations and some in-store interactions. But the blatantly large majority of these things happens online nowadays, which is a very interesting development, because that has started in the 90s and has basically conquered and changed the world, how people search for information in only 2 decades, basically. Okay, good. When we talk about search being online, remember, typically we distinguished in class, I want to know, go, or do moments, and we can add I want to buy moments, for instance, as well. Those are the 3 major searches that people put on the internet, in the sense that I want to know what we just said. There is so much information out there. I want to go, I want to have an overview of where I might know what I want, but I don't know where it is. So that is another thing where I might search information for. And I want to do something. That is also something where people start searching. They already have identified what they want, but they don't know with whom. And then, of course, purchases are a big story online, and for consumer behavior are a big thing. It's interesting. All these 3 previous things can lead to I want to buy moments. So I think in the digital class, we did not immediately have a distinction for I want to buy moments. There are several frameworks, but typically it's know, go, do. And you can look at buy separately if you want to. So this is something that is important. Also, remember, when we talked about marketers' action and coming to consumer information search and external information search, right? The search engine optimization and search engine advertising, basically in conjunction, are your understanding of the person's external search behavior. Because remember that Remember that keyword research is the most difficult and most important part of search engine advertising and search engine optimization, figuring out how the consumer looks for what you have to offer, right? Remember the long tail of distribution, and that specific terms are better and easier to target to be on number one on Google on a specific search than on a very generic search. That's important to keep in mind, right? So, and also to look for keywords that are in the tail, because specific words are more likely in the tail than general search terms. But this is like basically when we talk about internal search and habitual decision making, that's advertising. When we talk about external search, that's search engine optimization, where marketing actions come into play. Okay, so this is just how to tie these factors into other classes that we have done. Whether we do search or not depends on a set of factors. For instance, the first of it, is already said, is experience, right? When we are very experienced with the product, let me take this in a hand. Typically, when we are not very experienced with a product, we might not even have the capacity to search for it, because if I don't understand anything about computers, how might I use a computer in order to get the information out of it? And even if I search, for instance, on my PC about cell phones, if I don't know about cell phones, I might not understand product tests, and I might not understand the features and specifications of it. So if I don't know anything, I might not search that much and just ask somebody, hey, I don't know shit about this. Can you help me? Okay, I'll buy this. While if we have some experience, we might search a lot more, right? Because we understand things, we are aware of things, and we are interested in searching that. However, then again, if we know a lot about it, we might not have to search that much, because we already know and we understand, and we just need to keep ourselves updated and going with the flow. It's sort of in that sense that somebody who has studied a lot of marketing in the past can assess a situation based on previous experience and from internal knowledge, and doesn't need to read something additional in order to know what to do. And in the same way, if you have, if you know a lot about cars and there's not that much change, you might already know what to ask for and what to look for when buying for a new car, and you don't need to have that much external information search. So again, like crowding, we see an inverse U-shaped effect of how experience impacts the external search behavior. Other things that are important, of course, are involvement. If we are involved in something, we're more likely to be interested in it. Risk drives it as well. Also, what we said in the beginning, if I don't see the value of doing something, I might not do it. So the value of the search might be interesting as well. The time that we have under our disposition, of course, if we think about situations being made out of place and time, I might not have access to something in a certain situation, or I might not have the time in a certain situation. Whether we like shopping or not, and this is now for consumer decision making, if you want to buy something, and of course personal factors. Some people enjoy this more than others. As simple as that. As simple as that. So this is what search depends on. And then last but not least, there's also something that we call search regret. And search regret is basically negative emotions that can arise from a failed search process if you have looked for a lot of things and then didn't find what you want to find. So this might mean that you stop your decision-making process and just feel like you have wasted your time, you've wasted your effort, you have wasted you have wasted those resources on this, and you might not even look at it anymore. So this is also important. People get frustrated if they don't get closure based on what they have looked up. Okay, good. Then that's the second part of the decision-making process, and we'll see each other soon with a third session discussing the other parts, the remaining parts of the decision-making process. Have a great rest of the day and see you soon. Bye-bye.